It's one thing when something appears obvious to you, it's another when you start finding clues everywhere. So today, it's time we talked about Harandar. Now there's nothing actually super wrong with the zone, but something is not quite right. Now we all seem to agree that it's the weaker part of Midnight, and looking back, it is quite obvious why. The whole thing feels like one big side quest. The Devouring Host attacks Silvermoon, and we fight them off. The Twilight's Blade have taken Tranquillion, and the Amani have pushed into Eversong for the Lightwood. That leads to Arator's Depression quest, Zoljar's hero's journey. You know, we have these zone stories that are all naturally driven towards one clear end goal, fending off Xal'atath's attack, and then countering with their own. We go to Harandar in the middle of all of that, and it has absolutely nothing to do with any of it. I mean, technically, yes, it does have things to do with it. The light bloom is a problem, sure, and it is all connected to the Sunwell. And yes, we learned a bunch of pretty damn cool lore, actually, about the World Soul, the Rift of Aln, and the dangerous side of the light. But here's the thing. The rest of Midnight would have made perfect sense without that zone even existing. Now, if you've been paying attention, then you may just see where I'm going with this. My core claim is that Harandar doesn't belong in Midnight. Not that it's good, not that it's bad, simply that it does not belong. And Blizzard accidentally made that obvious from day one. And that is because fishing in Harandar Delves doesn't give you Midnight fishing skill. Disenchanting items dropped in Harandar does not give you Midnight materials. All across the zone, Harandar is still connected to where it was originally supposed to be, Kaz Algar. And once you see it here, you see it absolutely everywhere. Like, for an example, this side quest. This is Monty Gazlo, last seen over a year ago in the War Within's first patch. Now there's no real reason why he shouldn't be here, but it is a little bit odd. Though if we're looking for damning evidence, we gotta go elsewhere. Specifically, we have to go to the character of Freya. In our glimpse into the Haranir's history, we play through their escape from Freya and these Titan orbs. Now, this feels like a complete aside for the Midnight expansion, because, well, we're not really dealing with Titan stuff at the minute. But it would have been perfect for the War Within. Just think about that expansion's content. I mean, in that same quest, they also sneak past Nerubians. Nerubians like the ones in Azj-Kahet, which is where we first met Orwena and where we first found the Haranir camps. It's also where we found this strange spiral of roots. If you fly near them, well, you get put to sleep with a green sort of emerald dream-like effect, heavily implying, of course, that it's a portal to somewhere in the Emerald Dream. That was there in the War Within, but it never went anywhere. And then there's the small fact that Orwena was a whole quarter of the first War Within cinematic, but barely showed up in the expansion. Then there's the Black Blood and the storyline about the Unseeming. Those were really cool. They kind of went nowhere though, but the same creature models show up here in Harandar, one expansion later. So it's extremely obvious what happened. Harandar is actually the Rootlands, a data-mined zone planned and mostly even developed with the War Within in mind, at least at a certain point of time before they made this call. And hell, even the Haranir allied race clearly belongs in that expansion. Their story mirrors that of the Earthen, but, well, they're trolls instead of dwarves. But for some reason, Blizzard decided to kick the whole can down the road. There's a mountain of evidence, but there's a looming question as well. And that question is why? When Chris Metzen arrived, things changed a little bit. You see, Dragonflight was a good expansion, but WoW still had some existential problems. Production timelines clearly had issues, but maybe worse than that, the vibes were way off. WoW's story needed a shot in the arm, and it seems the plan was Metzen and a new creative team around him would bring that. But to release that vision, which of course we know as World Soul Saga, the War Within had to be quite substantially reworked. And that meant cutting things. No Rootlands, no follow-up for the Elune Ahir storyline that they spent a while building. And then of course there's Bellular, this world song connected crystal that behaves a lot like a Naru, yet the mystery is just left hanging there unanswered. And that's not even to mention the City of Threads, echoes of Suramar as an endgame hub, but barely used. And this isn't the first time Blizzard has had to make that call. really, it isn't, and a lot of the reason is that game dev is actually really goddamn hard when you are committed to a schedule. The thing is, the last time something like this happened, and was obvious to the public, it nearly killed the game. Many of us are still feeling a little bit burned, or at least just have a little quick access memory of Warlords of Draenor, and how weird it went. We were promised so much, shown so much, but we got almost none of it. A full-blown Shattrath raid that never happened. And that's something that is actually confirmed to have been their plan. Karabor, the uncorrupted Black Temple, was supposed to be our hub city. There's an entire island called Farallon that just never materialized. Warlords was a brutally empty expansion, and somehow its patch cycle was worse than that. We got 2 raids and 1 zone, and then we went for over a year without any content. Something completely unheard of for modern WoW as we see it today. But clearly, all that work they had done was left to rot on the cutting room floor, wasting massive amounts of time and money, and most importantly, just meaning there was less content shipped to players. And honestly, if Legion had not have been such a success, WoW may not have got out of that period of time alive. So, if World of Warcraft was going to have a future, problems like that could really never happen again. And that's where it's a fun contrast to today. Because obviously, instead of cutting Harandar, they, well, pasted it into the middle of midnight. Harandar might have been designed for the War Within, but imagine a midnight without it. There would have been 3 zones instead of 4. The Light Bloom would have had absolutely no follow-up from Eversong. We wouldn't have a new allied race. The main story arc would have been just fine actually, but I think the expansion itself would have suffered a fair deal. Without Harandar, Midnight would have needed an entire new zone built up from scratch. That's surely months of extra development effort. So simply put, they had planned what they planned, plans changed a bit, and they then had to make do. And honestly, they didn't just force it in. I mean, if you look at the seams, you'll find them. The Light Bloom, as an example. We know it started because of the Sunwell's light years ago. When the Sunwell pushed back against the Void Storm, a wave of light infected Shaladrisil all the way over here. And that is how it got to Harandar. That does kind of make sense, but it's also pretty clearly crowbarred in, especially when the setup for it in the War Within expansion was so obvious to all of us, even extending back to the whole Aluna Here stuff that Blizzard had built at the end of Dragonflight. Now the original idea then was most likely, say, light from Bellular reaching Harandar via the roots. That would have made complete sense within the War Within expansion. I mean, some people think the whole, oh, the light is suddenly evil. Number one, it's not evil, but a bunch of people think that it's a brand new thing that's just appeared in this expansion. No, this has been here pretty much for decades, but more specifically, well, think about the light stuff going on in the Priory. So all of this clearly would have worked near perfectly for the War Within. But while it does connect to Midnight, you can still see all the exposed nails where Blizzard did just hammer it into this expansion. Now when you're actually in the zone, all of that melts away. You get wrapped up in the stories of the Haranir hiding from the Titans. That's really cool. Of sleeping goddesses being stolen, of Alndust and how it protects from the excess light. We learn about the Shulka who needed to cut themselves off from Azeroth's song to survive in the Rift of All. The whole zone is actually full of its own story, and lots of it's pretty damn good. And when you look at this big picture and think about what they actually shipped with Midnight, even excluding the UI revamp and the housing, I think they more than pulled it off. A new feature called Prey, a new allied race, 4 zones, 8 dungeons, new spec, and even more story content with Arator's Journey on top of the main campaigns. And I would say there's also quality improvements. I'm really enjoying the delves. So Midnight, most people will agree, is better than the War Within. Quality hasn't taken a hit. It's just that Harandar is barely relevant to Midnight. But it doesn't have to be. The zone works, and the expansion works. So the real question is, was this a one-off rescue job? Or is there something bigger going on here? Here's the funny thing with Harandar. It does not belong in Midnight much, but that doesn't really matter, because do you know what it does belong to? World Soul Saga. Blizzard just moved it from Part 1 to Part 2. Creates a bit of a pacing issue, but it still does fit. The World Soul Saga looks like good marketing, and I think it is enough, at least for the modern day, but it is also a lot more than that. It does let Blizzard make more game, because they're building this big, wider story arc, and that means they've got more freedom with where they put things. I mean, if The War Within had have been a standalone expansion, then Harandar would have just dropped entirely. If there was no way to plausibly connect it to, say, Midnight, it probably would have just died on the cutting room floor. If you're just making content for one expansion or patch, then you have to make sure that it fits. But then, if a deadline slips too much, all of that work gets thrown out because, guess what, it'll no longer fit. And that's exactly the kind of waste that appears to have gutted Warlords of Draenor. They just could not get stuff done in time. The next expansion was Legion, and if you're doing Legion, I think it's quite hard to see how the Shatrath raid or maybe the island of Farallon could fit in that expansion. Now, food analogies are a bit cliche, but bear with me here. The World Soul Saga is basically a fridge for Blizzard's content. If a deadline slips or they change direction, they can, well, shelve it and bring it back for a later patch or expansion. So what's good is that at the planning stage, every developer can work full speed knowing that nothing they build will really go to waste. And the Lightbloom is probably the best example here. When they were planning Eversong, they knew that they had Harandar to work with. You've got nature in Harandar, light in Eversong, you combine the two of those things together, and you get the Lightbloom, which ends up being a fun enough way to explore both. And the result is an Eversong that I think is easily one of Blizzard's best zones, maybe ever. I think it's a fantastic zone, and it's a natural way to fold in the Imani. It actually works well. But hang on a second. Is this all a bunch of coping? And is the real truth that Blizzard are just trying to squeeze us harder for more money? Well, I mean, they do have an incentive to do that. They do have a Microsoft to keep happy. But every time faster expansions come up, people basically say that it's Blizzard trying to get more money, more expansion box sales, because they're more expensive than just a monthly sub. That's a fair enough question. So let's just go and do the maths on it. What we're going to do is compare the cost of playing 2 expansions under either model. So in the past, right, we had 2-year expansions, roughly an expansion every 2 years, and then we'd get 3 major patches in between each. So that's $15 a month for 48 months, plus 2 expansions, which in that era cost $40 each, bringing us to $800. That's $800 across 4 years. Now, in the 18-month model, you get an expansion every 18 months, you get 2 major patches in between, you get lots of minor patches, which, unlike in the past, are really quite substantive. Now, that ends up costing you $640 over 3 years, and that's taking into account the base expansion price going up by $10. So ultimately, you're paying more money per year, but you're paying less money per expansion, and you get them faster. Now, obviously, there is more nuance to that, but lots of the nuance does go in favor of the new model. I mean, minor patches are much, much bigger than they used to be, and, well, to cut in the other direction, the game is also monetized in many, many more ways than in the past. We're definitely beyond the point of saying bore lords of pay more in regards to Warlords of Draenor's love of store mounts, which are a hell of a lot more normal now. But the bottom line is actually this. You are paying less per expansion than you used to, and you're getting expansions faster. That is not Blizzard squeezing you. It is them trying to make more money from World of Warcraft, but I think by and large, they're doing that by delivering more World of Warcraft. I think the model is basically working. And to resurrect the food analogy, it's as if Blizzard unlocked meal prep, and Harandar is just the first dish that they pulls out of the fridge. We get more game, faster, and with less waste. And just like The War Within, Midnight was made in 18 months. So for the first time in WoW's history, we've got 2 expansions in just over 3 years. Harandar has not been perfectly integrated, or should I say, perfectly reheated once it's been taken out of the fridge, but it is also their first shot. The War Within had to be reworked to make World Soul Saga work. That's always going to be hard, and it certainly would have risked massive wastage as plans change. Harandar is fairly clear evidence of that, but when you think about The Last Titan, well, the jump from Midnight to it and beyond should be a lot smoother because they're out of that period of transition where the plans changed massively. If you're not aware, the original plan with The War Within was to do the whole World Soul storyline within one expansion. And you can certainly see now how they could have done that. Bringing in the light stuff with Bellular, doing the Rootlands, doing the Voidlands stuff. By the way, Rootlands and Voidlands certainly do go together, and there's stuff about the Voidstorm Zone that seems to suggest its internal working name was Voidlands. Yeah, they've actually done a good job of handling their production here and making it work for the final shipped product that we've got, and not dying to wastage and cut content. So, fair enough, they've actually done quite well. They just need to do the same for quality assurance next, because Midnight sure has had a lot more bugs than usual. Some of them rather critical, like a fun loot bug that may have bricked your character. It's happened to people in my guild, and if you want to learn about it, you can check out this news video after this.